business cards all the way to menus and flyers. Now 2 locations to better serve you. On Merricamp, half a mile east from Forest High School, and on 200 by Sonny's Barbecue. Loco Graphics, impacting your customers. Like us on Facebook.
Ocala's information station, 1370 WOCA.
Ocala.
All right, 24 minutes before 10 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. The other night, I had an opportunity. It was a joy to go to a graduation. My niece graduated from the 8th grade, and it was a private school, a Catholic private school. Everybody in town knows Blessed Trinity, I'm sure. And so that's where it was. It was just a wonderful thing to see. And I graduated from, I went through the public school system. I think you did too as well, Robin. And we have you and I have a unique vantage point regarding students in our community, because when you do a radio show, typically the kids who come in from the different schools are the cream of the crop. They're the ones doing the best. They come in here because they have an award-winning essay, or they've achieved something in sports or something. We usually see the cream of the crop.
Yes.
And we have said many, many times that there are students doing outstandingly well in the public school. There are kids doing outstandingly well in the private schools, religious or otherwise. And there are kids doing amazingly well in the homeschooling category. Mm-hmm. And we meet the ones who do well. We don't meet the ones who really don't do well.
That's right.
The ones who don't do well and don't end up coming onto radio shows. So we kind of have a what do you call when you have rose-colored glasses, I guess, when it comes to our education. However, we're not totally blind to the problems that our schools have had and some of the challenges that they've had. And our listeners and us and experts have had these debates about whether to get rid of public school and make them all private school. And that doesn't seem like a good idea, because then you would have a lot of kids who never went to school at all. Mark Claypool might have a nice answer to this dilemma. Mark is a social worker. He's an education administrator. He's the founder of Educational Services of America, providing behavior therapy and alternative special education programs for children and young adults. He is featured in the Tennessean, the Associated Press, the Nashville Business Journal, the San Francisco Chronicle. He's named one of the most admired CEOs by the Nashville Business Journal. And he's got a book called We're in This Together, Public-Private Partnerships in Special and At-Risk Education. Mark Claypool, what a list of credentials. Holy mackerel. Good morning, Mark.
Well, good morning. Thank you.
Where are you, in Nashville right now?
No, I'm actually in Phoenix right now. We're attending, my wife and I are attending our Ombudsman School's graduation here for at-risk kids.
Oh, okay. And can you help us understand, what do you mean by at-risk kids?
Certainly. Kids who are at risk are those that are just not performing well in the mainstream, and they are not going to graduate on time, or they may not graduate at all if some special intervention is not given. And that's what I mean by at-risk.
Okay. Is it STEM? Can you trace the causes for this? Is it reading ability? Is it behavioral things? What is it?
You know, it's all over the board, and that's really a big part of the message of our book, is the need to customize services for kids. We live in an incredibly diverse culture, and in many ways our public school systems are still operating on kind of the industrial age model that was so homogenous compared to the realities of today. So we think that there needs to be a lot of different flavors of public education in order to meet the needs of this incredibly diverse population of kids. You know, we serve kids that have all sorts of issues with home life. Obviously, that is a big part of what goes on. That the kids come to the front door of our public schools with a lot of baggage, with a lot of issues at home to deal with. They come with learning disabilities. They come with deprivation of poverty sometimes. All of these things compound the problems of these kids and make them less likely to jump right in with their cohort or their peers and keep up.
When we talk about a public-private partnership, the one thing that enters my mind is kind of like an oil and water thing where they don't mix. I can't imagine as a private sector person trying to team up, whether it's schools or building roads, but just teaming up with a government agency that does the same thing and not feeling like somehow every decision is ultimately going to be theirs because I wouldn't have any pull. I mean, how does this work with the public-private partnership in schools?
Well, that's a great question. You've really hit the nail on the head with the issue, and that is how do you blend the private sector, which brings, in my opinion, a tremendous amount of advantages to the public school system as a partner. We are specialists. We're not generalists. So our company, for instance, partners with public schools for special needs kids, obviously for kids who are going to drop out of school, and for very young children with autism. And those are the three things that we specialize in. We really like to present ourselves as that sort of specialist, much like a physician who's a specialist would work together with a general practitioner. And that's the culture that we're really trying to propagate with the book. It can be challenging politically to work together because there has been a long-standing idea that it's sort of an us against them, that the public school systems have to guard their turf and they have to make sure the private sector doesn't get in. And that's so unfortunate because it's so much better for the kids when every tool is made available to our public school systems. I'm a huge believer in public schools. I think that public schools work best when they are locally controlled, and I'm not for a top-down approach. However, I think that there's a lot that can be done to clear the way for these kinds of partnerships to help school districts meet a choking list of demands that are really upon them. If you look at the list of things that public school systems are required to do, and that list grows constantly. Many of the things that we expected families to do 30 years ago are now the responsibility of the public school system.
And what you have done with your book, you incorporate facts and figures, but you also incorporate real stories.
Yes, that's correct. And we have a lot of those real stories. We work with about 14,000 kids a day in our company, so we certainly are immersed in this issue, and we know what a great partnership looks like and what it takes.
You know what I can hear the listeners wondering about, and I'll try to talk on their behalf. I can hear them wondering about the tax money, because in the private sector, the ultimate goal is to make money, to have a profit. If the public sector is teaming up with them, it's almost like there would be a question, I'm sure. And having done a radio show for a long time, I know that the tax watchdogs that are out there, and I'm horrible at this, but our listeners often are way better at this than I am. But they'll often point out that if you have private sector in the mix, they will be benefiting from public dollars, and they won't have to do the real marketing work that a private sector business normally has to do. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, I understand the point, and certainly, again, you've verbalized a very consistent point that we have to deal with in our relationships. I think when you think about the private sector in education, we have to go ahead and admit to everybody and admit to ourselves that ship sailed a long, long time ago. If you were to look, for instance, just at the provision of textbooks and curriculum materials, I think the last time I checked, public school systems in America spend roughly $7 billion with a B dollars a year on textbooks. They don't make their own textbooks. They buy their textbooks, and they have forever. They don't buy a lot of things. They don't make them. They buy a lot of things. They don't make their own pencils. They don't make their own paper, obviously.
Right.
Buildings. They contract with for-profit companies to build school buildings. They contract or they make agreements with for-profit banks to finance the building of school buildings. So tax dollars are public dollars, or private dollars collected for the public good, and they are used throughout public education in partnership with the private sector, because the private sector has greater efficiencies in certain things and can do something the public sector simply can't do well.
Okay, so with that said, and we'll have to take a break, and you can answer this on the other side of the break, but it sounds like, A, we've already had a public-private partnership. It's always been part of schools. And so then B would be the question of what exactly is different about what we're talking about from what you just described. So if you'll just allow us to take a little break, we'll come back and get the answers to that on the other side of the break. Mark Claypool is our guest. We're talking about a book he's written called We're in This Together, which outlines everything that we're talking about. It's public-private partnerships in special and at-risk education. And there's so many more questions, and we'll deal with them when we come back. This is WOCA Ocala.
The weather is brought to you by myfwc.com. Safe boating is no accident. Sunshine and some clouds today. A shower or thunderstorm around mainly this afternoon. Our high 85 to 90. Any showers or thunderstorms will die off this evening, and partly cloudy later tonight. Low 68 to 72. Partly sunny tomorrow with a shower or thunderstorm. High 85 to 90. A few showers and thunderstorms Sunday with a high of 85 to 90. From the Florida Weather Center, I'm meteorologist Steve Travis.
Are you tired of not using your home's outdoor space for entertaining or relaxation because of all the bugs and leaves? Consider adding a beautiful screen room or glass enclosure. We are Superior Aluminum and Design, a family-owned and operated business with 20 years experience in the aluminum industry, and we are accredited by the Better Business Bureau. If you appreciate superior workmanship, call Superior Aluminum and Design at 817-8058 or visit us on the web at superiораluminumdesign.com.
If you're anything like I was, the thought of getting older was the last thing on your mind. But here we are. For me, it started slowly. The lack of energy, never being in the mood. And when I was, I could never perform at my best. I tried the pills and other treatments with minimal results, and all but given up on my sex life. Then I found the doctors at New Male Medical Center. Wow, they made a new male out of me. Feel like I'm 25 again. I have renewed vigor, so much more energy, and no longer worry about my performance. New Male treated me like my situation was one of a kind, with a custom treatment plan that really works. I feel great. They can create one for you too. It does not matter if you suffer from low testosterone, erectile dysfunction, or just want to last longer. New Male will help you.
Call New Male Medical Center today at 352-404-4779. 352-404-4779. That's 352-404-4779. It will change your life. 352-404-4779.
One of the most common questions those nearing retirement are asking: will I outlive my money? Retirement questions like these and many more will be answered every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. on Planning for a Better and Safer Retirement with hosts Francois and Julian Pozenet. Francois and Julian will help you put your retirement puzzle together. Catch Planning for a Better and Safer Retirement Saturdays at 9 a.m. on Ocala's News Talk, The Source 96.3 FM and 1370 AM.
All right, 11 minutes before 10 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. We have a wonderful school in our community. It's for autistic students, and the children sometimes go to this school. It's called New Horizons, and then they more or less graduate from it and go back to public schools. And it depends on their level of the spectrum, of the autism spectrum. And of course, many times they don't ever go to another school. But the one thing I wanted to tell Mark Claypool about was this. And we get this from the folks over there at New Horizon. It's a beautiful little school. But the money doesn't follow the kids. So there's a certain amount of money allocated per student from your tax money.
Right.
And I think they told us 50% of the money follows them to the school, which isn't really enough. The other 50%, for some reason or other, stays at the school when a child is taken out of a public school and put into this private school for autistic children. So I don't know if that's across the board or across the country, or if that's part of what this is about, but it sounds like it is, because you did mention autistic children, Mark.
Yes, that is a big part of what's going on. Is it across the country? Not the the specific math because each state handles these situations differently. But that is certainly an accurate representation of what happens in Florida.
So now that's a particular kind of child. Are we talking about? I know you talk about those children. Are we also talking about students who are behaviorally challenged? That's a terrible word, but in other words, are they juvenile delinquents? Do we have those children who are better educated with a different approach?
Oh, I think most certainly. And again, I don't really get hung up on the labels of the kids.
Right.
I've been around long enough to know that, frankly, a kid from the south side of Chicago may have the same issues as a child from Altamont Springs, but who their parents are has a lot to do with what label they get, and therefore who's paying the bill for their services.
Oh, okay.
So kids are kids. Kids across the board are remarkably similar. It's the grown-ups that seem to goof everything up, in our opinion.
Do you go to the different school boards at the different school systems throughout the states and present alternatives to some of the ways that they are teaching that could help the children?
Sure do. We meet with school districts and school boards constantly. We currently have contractual relationships with about 250 different school districts. And so, we're very used to dealing with, again, these questions and some of the great questions you guys have been bringing up, even in this interview, about the relationship of the private sector to our public schools, and those things can be overcome. They can be overcome. Those concerns can be overcome in a dialogue and in a conversation that just often doesn't happen. It's unfortunately sort of a reflexive and very political discussion that gets had at a high level, and we really want to bring this dialogue more out in the open, which is really why we wrote the book. We want to create this conversation, and hopefully a conversation that leads public school districts to say, it's okay to ask for help. That is the biggest challenge that we have, is that culture that somehow public education has to go it alone.
So before the break, we were kind of establishing, reestablishing what you already said, is that the relationship has always been there, because obviously schools don't print their own books, they don't build their own schools, they don't finance themselves, they have private sector banks helping them. So since that's always been the case, what is this level that we're talking about now? What is it? Is it more private partnership than it was before? Is there something additional?
Well, I think where it trips over a line that creates friction is when you're talking about the direct instruction of students. And that's where it gets political and uncomfortable for some people to think of bringing a private company in to assist with actual instruction rather than just providing a product or a service that is not related directly to kids. And again, that's a very contentious discussion sometimes, but it's been going on for a very long time, and frankly, some places that might seem politically unlikely. California has used private schools and private providers, they call them non-public schools and non-public agencies, to support public education in the field of special ed for 35 years. And many public school systems in California do very little of their own special education. They contract for all of it, and they control it. They manage that contract. And I know you had brought up the issue of transparency about tax dollars before the break, which is certainly a concern that people have. And it's, as a taxpayer, I would have that concern too, that we need to be good stewards of what we have. But, really at the end of the day, it needs to be focused all about the kids. And that's another message of our book. It's, instead of getting hung up on the economic structure of who's doing what, let's focus on educating the public rather than just sort of blindly supporting an institution of public education.
Yeah, because it seems that federal government mandates really get in the way of teaching the students, because they'll be dangling money in front of school systems within, the state and say, well, if you do this, we'll give you money, but if you don't follow our rules, you can't have it.
Exactly. And then the money gets segmented into these little pockets that are entitlements. And so they're categorical funds is what they're often called. In school districts, I'm not exaggerating to tell you that there's typically one person in the school district that even begins to understand where the money is and what it can be used for, and that's the chief financial officer of the school district. It is the most convoluted form of accounting that one can imagine. And that's another advantage that a private company has to come in and help a school district, because we're not bound by that sort of fund-based accounting. We use generally accepted accounting principles as a private company that's audited and so forth that we have to do. And so we can move faster, we can move money around internally and get to and really get to a solution quickly and scale up quickly. And that's another thing that private companies can do to help public school systems.
Robert and I help out the local literacy council, and what they do is they teach adults who never learned how to read. And there's a doctor on the board of directors over at the Literacy Council who is a private doctor, private practice, and he's a psychologist. And he has this amazing ability to teach adults how to read who, for one reason or another, haven't learned. And it's not always because they didn't get the education. Sometimes there's something psychological, and he breaks through and makes a big difference. And my thought was we should have this in the schools when these people are children. There should be somebody with that understanding, and that would be a perfect partnership for private and public.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. But that is a critical need.
So we're out of time, but I want to make sure the listeners can look this up. The book is called We're in This Together. I guess we could start there. Do you have a website for the book?
We do. It's markkclaypool.com.
Okay, just your name. Robin already has your name on the website. For those listening and driving, you want to just go to WOCI.com and go to our guest list. You'll see Mark's name. Is the book on Amazon?
It is. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes & Noble. And it's We're in This Together, Public-Private Partnerships in Special and At-Risk Education.
And that's really wonderful that you're bringing this to the forefront, because we have a few private schools in town, and two of them belong to churches, and one is just a private school. The two that belong to the churches, they are losing students, and they need to keep their head above water. The one that isn't associated with the church, they get together with the folks from Marion County, and every year they have the Marion County Chili Cook-Off, and all the money that's raised from that chili cook-off goes to that one private school. So they're working with the county for the one school.
Right.
For Cornerstone.
All right. Mark, thank you for being on the air with us today. And it sounds like a good thing. I mean, it sounds, what I've always thought, and if I can squeeze this in real quickly, one of the mistakes we make, us guys that do radio, us guys and ladies, is that we try to understand stuff that we have like a morning to study. We don't study things for a long time. And so consequently, we start formulating opinion based on whatever people are feeding us. A good example of this is Common Core, because I found myself making that mistake, having an opinion, and all of a sudden it occurred to me, I'm not a teacher. And when I was reading what teachers were saying, I understood that they understood this better than I ever will. So it is important to listen to people like yourself and just be open-minded about what it's about and try to, and then we can maybe form a better opinion. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Well, that's a great perspective. And again, I would come back, if all we could do is talk about kids, a lot of this other noise would get out of the way, and we could worry about
you made it clear that is your focal point, and I think that's really what it's about, Mark. And that's wonderful. That's what all educators should be, is about the kids. And I think they all are, or most of them, 99%.
I agree, 100%.
Mark,
nobody gets into education unless they love kids.
Thank you. Mark K. Claypool. His name is spelled exactly as it sounds. Go to his website, get the book, We're in This Together. We'll be right back.
96.3 FM, The Source.
Fox News Radio. I'm Lillian Wu. The Labor Department putting out a solid job report for May.
Non-farm payrolls increased by 2